We're dealing in this event with a question that has been at the core of my activities and so many activities here at the University of Michigan, and that is, Michigan's economic mojo. To get that started, I want to tell you a quick story. Roughly a year ago, I was in the Bay Area and I had breakfast with one of the most influential venture capitalists, and we talked about investments he had made or he was waiting for, like Snapchat and some of the top names. And I said, what's new that you're excited about? And he said, well, I just made an investment of a few $1 million in a company that's actually not in the Bay Area and is really, really exciting. And I said, well, what's the company? He said, I think it's in your neck of the woods. It's in Ann Arbor. It's Duo Security. You can meet the guy who started it. And I was really excited about that. I took the red eye back the next morning, and the evening after that of landing here, I did a meeting with students and sat around the table. And the question the students wanted to talk about is like, how do we get cool companies built in Michigan? I was like, wow. Sometimes the mojo is already here. You have to find it. And so, the question about how to build back that mojo and how to grow it is one that's really central to what we're doing here, both for our students and also for the companies around us. The question, of course, is vital for the region and is part of a program that I'm running called Innovate Blue that connects and combines entrepreneurship and innovation programs around the university to create a best-in-class experience that cannot be matched, really deploying the power of and strength of the university in many different parts to the benefit of our students who need that entrepreneurial and innovation tool set as they enter a time of change and a time of excitement where entrepreneurial tool sets are really needed. So we want to build that experience and also can only do that if we really connect to the world around us. It's absolutely clear that the best people sometimes in the classrooms are the ones that you're going to meet here that actually are building these companies and are coaching our students. So that's why we're so excited to host these friends and in many cases our co-teachers and mentors right here. But what I'd like to do now is really do my most important task today, which is to introduce the moderator, Cynthia Canty. Cynthia is a veteran reporter, news anchor, and on-air host of Detroit Radio and TV. Her program, Michigan Radio Stateside, of course, which I listen to on a regular basis, covers a wide range of Michigan news and policy issues that matter to people across the state. Thank you so much for coming, and welcome to Cynthia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to see you here today. Thank you so much for coming out. And Michigan Radio is very, very excited to partner with the University of Michigan School of Engineering because we're here today to dig into a very, very critical question, as Tom said. What is it that we need to do to really regain Michigan's entrepreneurial spirit and make Michigan an entrepreneurial powerhouse again? Why is it that entrepreneurs feel they have to leave Michigan? What do we need to do to keep people here and bring in new people? When you think about it, in the first half of the 20th century, Michigan had a lot of entrepreneurial muscle. It was a powerhouse. So here we are, it's 2014. What do we need to do to get the entrepreneurial environment and climate to a point where entrepreneurs can be the ones to help lead Michigan back to full economic recovery? We have an incredible panel assembled for you here today. So we're going to hear from them, but we also want to hear from you, those of you here at the Stamps Auditorium, those of you watching on the live stream, or tweeting us at #MishMojo. So get ready with your questions and your opinions for our panel. We're going to be handing out cards, and you can be passing the cards, and then we can get a chance to kind of hear from you as well, and you can talk to this great panel. Before we begin that, though, let's take a few moments and find out why some entrepreneurs felt that they had to leave Michigan to grow their businesses, and others felt that this state had everything they needed to do the job.
There's a quote, which is a sort of William Blake quote, which is, "I must invent a system or be enslaved by someone else's." And I very much believe in inventing my own systems because I don't want to listen to anybody else. I don't like authority.
Give me a hard one. I mean, skateboarding is kind of a little bit of punk rock kind of sport. Yeah, startups are the punk rock of business. You go out to disrupt an industry or do something great.
I ended up joining right after school a company was headquartered in San Francisco. And so by joining a company that was based kind of out here in Silicon Valley or the SF Bay Area allowed me to just work with a lot of technologists and a lot of interesting platforms that probably would have been harder to find at other sort of Michigan companies that weren't as plugged into the Valley.
Before I moved out here, I said, I'm not moving to San Francisco. It's so cliche to move out there as an entrepreneur. Everyone goes out there. But there's a reason. There's a reason that people move out here when they're young and hungry and they want to change the world.
You're biking by the headquarters where Adobe Photoshop is made, or like, you know, where Facebook is created, or all these sorts of things. There was just such a high level of density here. There were great people in Michigan, but they were just like so much more tightly compressed out here, where so many people were focused on designing and building the next thing.
I think in terms of unique challenges to this company and things that we've faced, one of the biggest ones is being to figure out how we do it all here in Michigan.
I think a newspaper headline when I first moved here was, "Detroit, America's most miserable city," or something. And I'm like we're sitting in these bubble chairs, and you're like, that's not the reality.
Like, it's not like in San Francisco where you go out, walk outside to run into like a venture capitalist or other developers. But when you're in the spaces, like you're in the Madison building or the Madison block, you really get that sense of community.
People are approachable. There's a Midwest helpfulness, which I think does translate actually to a lot of the dynamic we have enjoying the Valley of people paying it forward and trying to help each other out.
It really wasn't a question for me to go move to San Francisco and start a company because I'd have no access to any of those networks there or support. In Detroit, I really have that support to grow it.
I call Detroit the city of makers. I have friends out here that are making skateboards out of their garage. I have other friends that are creating, the product of the future, in their basement.
Anyone can come in here and have the opportunity to just define themselves like that. If you work really hard and you make a successful product, you can have such a huge impact on the culture.
Maybe now that we've hit rock bottom, we are starting to see like bigger ideas and bigger initiatives happen. I'd like to see, again, hopefully a shift in the culture and the community where we're not so afraid to try big things, to see them work or see them fail, but to learn together how we should move forward.
I think it's because Michigan is so focused on trying to make Michigan look good that they don't want to look bad. If they're real and they're honest, I think that might actually attract people more, but it's scary to do because it may not make you look perfect, right? But everyone knows it's not perfect, but no one knows what the bad things of Michigan are because we don't talk about them. And I think that's one of the things that Michigan can learn from the Bay Area is to really be honest about where the challenges are and open up the doors for people to come in and say, oh, I can help you with that challenge.
And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our panel for today's conversation. First, please welcome the President and the CEO of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Mike Finney. Hello, Mike. Well, you saw him in the video. You heard him this week on Stateside, the founder of Duo Security in Ann Arbor. Welcome to Doug Song, minus the mustache. But with that irrepressible spirit intact, clearly. Our next panelist is clinical professor of business administration at the Ross School of Business and the founder of the Innovatrium, Jeff DeGraff. And we're pleased today to have a graduate of the Ross School of Business with us. She is VP and Managing Director at Invest Detroit. Please welcome Patty Glazer. Said, I'm ready for snow.
Got the boots.
That's right. And our fifth panelist also brings the entrepreneur's perspective. He has led companies in both the Bay Area and in Ann Arbor. Please welcome Bob Sell. All right, so we've got them there. I'm going to start off with questions for each of our panelists, one at a time, and then we move into conversation mode, and we're going to get them talking together. We want your questions, and we have cards for you in the audience, and writing comments and questions. We invite you to do that. Signal our team, and they'll collect it from you, and you can tweet us also at #MishMojo. And now I have to get a drink of water. Okay, so we're going to begin, and Mike Finney, the question I wanted to get your thoughts on the path to being a state that has a strong startup environment, where do you think Michigan is right now? Where we want to get to, where are we now? Where are we on that path?
Well, I think we've made an awful lot of progress over the last decade plus. In fact, my first experience in really trying to serve as a catalyst in the entrepreneurial space, it started about 14 years or so ago during my first stint at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. We actually created a little group that was known as the emerging business sectors. And essentially that group was to focus on a few key technologies that were on the cusp of really taking off, things like IT and software, advanced manufacturing, biotech and life sciences. And then we started to put together pools of venture capital through some creative tax credit financing and other things. And so, that was the starting point. Fast forward 14 years, and I think we've made an awful lot of progress. We've figured out how to build pools of capital. And while we certainly are not where the coasts are in terms of venture capital, but if you look at where we were and where we are now, it's orders of magnitude improved, and we continue to make progress. When you look at technology-based companies and the number of startups that were happening, we had a few, and most of those were concentrated here in the Ann Arbor area, frankly associated with the University of Michigan. The ones that were staying, we probably saw more that were leaving, like my panelist friend here, Bob Sell, who chose to leave and go to other places because the environment and the ecosystem wasn't quite what it needed to be to support him. And fast forward to today, we've put an awful lot of time and effort into building that ecosystem with networks of entrepreneurs who've been successful, some who have gone away and come back, with capital sources that can support them, with facilities, incubators, business accelerators that can support them. University technology transfer operations at many of our universities that are literally pushing to get technologies out of the universities and into the hands of either faculty, students, or other individuals that are interested. And so if I had to put a number on it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say we probably are in the 4 to 5 range, which means we still have a long way to go in order for us to have a robust environment where every entrepreneur that has a pedigree with Michigan is thinking that they can do here what some of the folks in the video identified is happening in Silicon Valley. A lot of good things going on, especially here in Southeast Michigan, over in the Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo area, but we still have a ways to go, but we're not shy about that. We understand it, and as an organization, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, we're spending tens of millions of dollars annually to continue to seed all those key components of a vibrant ecosystem.
Fantastic, thank you. Doug Sugg, we saw in the video that you chose to build your business in Ann Arbor. Tell me, what ingredients do you feel make a good environment for a startup?
I think the ingredients that make a good environment for a startup are talent, primarily. Without the talent to go and build a team to go and change the world with, you'll go nowhere. I think one of the challenges we have here is that while we produce a lot of very good engineering talent, there's not a lot of experienced managerial talent, I think, to take companies to the next level. And so you see a lot of startups that they do come up here, they're birthed here, they're sort of nurtured here until they can basically walk, but then they run, right? And they run right out of here toward the coast, where again they might find their flock. And so one of the bigger challenges we have is how do we lean into the successes of companies that are about to hit their second stage and grow them to the point where they become anchors, right, for the rest that are coming up. I was just in Indianapolis earlier this week, where a company called ExactTarget had been acquired by Salesforce for $2.7 billion after their IPO. And the impact of an exit like that in that community has been tremendous in terms of fostering lots and lots more spin-off companies and new startups, sort of around the edges of that that organization. We don't have something like that here. We have basically 2 tech franchises in Detroit, CompuWare and Quicken Loans. And until we have more billion-dollar exits, home runs, all the singles and doubles that we're hitting right now aren't going to get us that far. So I think there's a lot more to do than just keeping people here. There's, as Mike says, building a good ecosystem so that all the rest of the components that you need to scale are here.
Thank you. Jeff DeGraff, we had a great conversation when you were on stateside that I'd like you to kind of share and elaborate on. Talking about how and when Michigan lost that entrepreneurial mojo that it had in the first half of the 20th century, although I'm certain at the time they didn't call it mojo.
Well, what was interesting was that the whole Michigan economy sort of happened in 2 different ways. If you look back historically, one of them, which I think we've forgotten, is that the #1 trading partner of the United States is Canada. 31% of all trade is Canada. And Michigan really started as a trading outpost for the John Jacob Astor Company, right? So the whole notion of our relationship with Canada, I think sometimes gets lost in this picture. And I think it needs to be re-established in a really powerful way. But the second thing is the automobile industry, when it started out, looked like a bunch of startups. And what happens in any industry is there's a consolidation period. So from about 1900 to about 1920, there's all kinds of chaos. It looks like Silicon Valley. Then it begins to consolidate. And then what happens is there's enough capital intensity, enough of this creativity cluster, enough talent and culture in some very small areas that what happens is they become tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s. And ironically, over the years, some of those tier 1s become some of the largest companies in the world, right? So there's a clear ecosystem. What happens is the oil embargo happens, the 1972, 1973. We have the great layoffs, one of the recessions in the early 1980s, and it casts a pall. And here's why. When any ecosystem develops, it starts out with a lot of diversity, with a lot of variation, but as it grows up, it tries to become efficient. So everything eliminates diversity. And what happens is at the very point that you're very efficient, if that model breaks, everything breaks. So between 1995 and 2005, over 1/3 of all the manufacturing jobs in the United States are in the upper Midwest. There are jobs. They disappear. So now we have to go back to scratch. So here's the challenge. The challenge is entrepreneurial companies are great. The problem is small companies are not all the same. 50 people companies are often mom and pop companies. They don't want to grow. They often are very sensitive to market and economic conditions, the cost of capital, and a lot of times they blow up. They have a high mortality rate. The real key to jobs and getting this momentum going isn't the top. It's not General Motors and it's not the bottom. It's the second stair. It's what we sometimes call mid-cap or mid-sized companies. Look at Germany. This is how they have sort of full employment and why they have a number of these kind of innovation areas. These are companies of 500 to 1,500 people. They stick around, they get capital, they help each other. You've got momentum and critical mass. That's what happened.
Beautiful. That really is good. And speaking of capital, Patty, I want to talk about capital. The Michigan Venture Capital Association reports big money is certainly raining down on the East and West Coast. California, and I know, Mike, you alluded to this, had $14.8 billion in venture capital investment last year, tops in the nation. Massachusetts had $3.1 billion. Michigan, $120 million. What do you think it'll take to get more of that investment money to Michigan?
I think we're on the right track for that. So the folks in the state who understand building capital at all levels and that we need the seed capital through the growth capital have been really thoughtful about putting programs in place to make sure there are funds available at each level. So state programs that allow for the state of Michigan investing in out-of-state funds as well as larger in-state funds to really try to promote the investment in the region. That's really done a great job. We've got Fund of Funds, Renaissance Venture Capital Fund, which is investing again in our venture capital funds to make sure capital is available. The state has a first manager type or first early fund type program. We're investing in, again, these levels of making sure that we can we have enough capital at the seed stage and that will grow companies through this progression. And a lot of people are stepping into this. The foundations are stepping in. The universities are playing a much bigger role. University of Michigan has tons of different pots that they're starting to pull together to fund young companies. So I think it's really continuing that, not letting go that momentum, because I think you've got a lot of committed investors. Just being in the investment community, looking at it, 15 years ago when, there might have been 10 or 15 of us in the room, where now it's wall to wall. So we have an event and, there are 110 people in the last venture gathering. And that energy and excitement, that sharing of deals, the collaboration, really, again, keeping the energy, I think, on the programs that we have is absolutely critical, not to let go and not to drop that momentum.
Bob Zell, you've run startups in the Bay Area and here in Ann Arbor. So give us a perspective check. What do you see are Michigan's unique strengths and unique weaknesses when you compare to a startup hotbed like the Bay Area?
Well, to Mike's introduction, I did start my first company that I started in California. Times were much different. I had just come off of a company that had gone public. I was in the Bay Area. I was looking at what to do, and had run a company for Dixon Dahl, and now was trying to figure out how I could start my own. And didn't even really think twice about starting it back in Michigan, even though I was coming back here all the time. And the reason was the capital was abundant, the talent was there, they were ready to make risks. It was just, it's a hotbed. It's just ready for a spark and things can fly. And I'd say Michigan has moved from something where I would say the capital was, as Patty described it, and using the numbers, we were probably a 1. Back then, maybe a 2. And now, maybe Mike's number's probably close, and things are better. But to get here wasn't easy. I give Mike and team a ton of credit. This has not been just, it sort of happened. This has been from the governor on down, trying to figure out how strategically the state can move to become more entrepreneurial. And it's not easy when your whole industry is a bunch of people who have, basically grown up where your parents were in one company for their entire career. So to get a mindset where you start a company and you go to another one within a year, it's a little different here. But long story short, I grew my company that I started in California. The first 30 people were there, and then the next 100 were in Ann Arbor. And so I've been trying, and I worked with MEDC and others to foster that growth in town. And from that, we've probably employed, I'm going to say, 250 or so employees over the last 6 years that are now doing other tech things. And so that little bit creates a little bit of tinder in the ground. And so when you see things like the Detroit Venture Society that's going on with Dan Gilbert, that's now breeding a bunch of companies. Are they all going to be successful? No, but they're going to learn, they're going to try, and that's going to create more tinder. And so what we need then is that spark that Doug was alluding to, right? Once you get one of those that fly, then people believe you can have the major exit. And so I see that we're building it, and that's what gets me excited. So I want to start my next company here and not there so that we can use that and see what happens.
I want to remind all of you that we've got the cards. We would love to hear your questions, and so please feel free to signal our team and pass your questions along. You can also tweet us at #MishMojo. And now it's just jump ball time. And in fact, I'd like to have any of you who want to kind of elaborate more on what I had asked Bob, which is what you really see as Michigan's main strengths and main weaknesses when you look at what we offer right now for entrepreneurs. Probably starting with you, Mike Finney.
Well, I wanted to actually build on a comment that both Doug and Bob made with respect to having those significant exits that then create, this family of startup activity and growth. And I think back to a good friend of mine, a guy named Roger Newton, who was a former Pfizer scientist and executive, who launched a company called Esperion Therapeutics back in the, I think it was early 2000, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And I think Roger probably has the most significant exit that's happened in the state of Michigan in the last 20 plus years. And I think that exit at the time, around 2004, was about $1.2, $1.3 billion. And so our staff at the MEDC, we've now started to take a look at some of the exits that have happened, large and small, to try and understand the family tree. In other words, what's happened to the wealth that was created by the startup companies? And are those individuals that were, C-level executives, principals, partners, founders, just some of the successful members of the team, are they doing other entrepreneurial ventures? Are those happening in Michigan? What technology space are they in? And how does that look if you were to lay it out like a family tree? And Esperion looks precisely the way Doug described and what Bob is describing needs to happen. We were pretty amazed at what all the folks associated with that company had done and are still doing, mostly here in Michigan. So we know there's tremendous potential for us to be successful if we can find the next Esperion Therapeutics or Arbortext or you name it. There's been some really interesting companies where we can literally track the pedigree of all the individuals that were associated. So we know that works. And the challenge for us as a state is figuring out how to tap into more of those. And we've got a team, we've got a lot of programs underway. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but we do have a lot of activities underway that are trying to get at that.
Yeah, I think every year for the last 5 years, we've had, or maybe 6, we've had a multi-$100 million exit, right? Whether it be, after Esperion, there were Handy Lab, Health Media, Accuracy Cytometer, Arbor Networks, ours, Compendia Bioscience, and each one of these companies should have spun off a bunch more, right? I mean, that's your hope. Arbor, we had a few, a company I did also called Zatu. We started a bunch of small, very, very small ones that came out as well. But I think if you actually chase down a lot of the money historically that's come out of tech, it has sort of flown the coop. Like, not to rag on Dixon at all. I'm going to get in trouble here. But Dixon and his family, they still have a place here. They still come back. Of course, Dahl Capital Management. Where's their money invested? China. They have a $1 billion. They have a lot of money in their management, and they're not really investing it here, right? And you sort of scratch your head and figure, well, why is that? Right? What happened to those guys?
I'd like to challenge one thing here, which is the model we keep going to is Silicon Valley, and I think it's an inappropriate model. I think it's a very different animal in the state of Michigan. Very different history, very different culture. You should look at other models that have these creativity clusters, this density of innovation, like the Research Triangle, which came out of Tobacco Road. You should look at what's happened in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which came out of the failure of the steel companies. There's a lot of places where there's a tremendous job growth, tremendous amounts of employment that have radically changed, and they are built on the composition of what that community originally was. Use what you have where you are now, as Teddy Roosevelt said. So Michigan has this very interesting set of attributes that I think it's overlooking. Number one of the largest growth areas in the world is clean tech. I've been for years on the advisory board at General Electric for this. Interestingly enough, where are the most design engineers in the world located? They're located in this state. They're located particularly in the northern suburbs, right? One of the big things is water management. Who's surrounded by 95% of all the fresh water in the United States? I mean, you go through and look at this and go, there are these tremendous things, but what happens is we get distracted. We try to be everything to everybody. Oh, we're going to be in film. Really, what's our advantage for that? Right? That's, it's less than 2% of employment in Southern California. It's not going to, so the issue becomes, are we going to chase every rabbit down a hole? Are we going to pick a few suns by which all of our planets are going to revolve around? And what happens in these places is once those things get going, then other things come in. Then you get other industries and other areas because they're basically servicing or adjacent to the industries that you've got. So I think we should look at, for example, how has Ontario done it? I mean, they're having little problems right now, but they've been very successful with employment and innovation in some ways. How has mid-caps happened in Germany? How in fact in some of these more, Pittsburgh, great story about turning that around. I would like us to get a different picture and a different metaphor in our head. I'm somebody also who spent a lot of my career in Silicon Valley. I just think it's a model we couldn't do. I don't think it's the model we want to pursue. I think there are better models.
Yeah, I'm going to challenge that though a little bit too. I think there's, chasing every rabbit hole, I agree that can be a bad path. But if you pick areas, and I'll use clean tech as a great example. I've been in that space for a long time. It's not an area where we're going to see billion-dollar exits. So if we want those billion-dollar exits that are going to lead to an increased activity and increased investment and increased experience and proliferation, those are not the companies that are going to see that high growth and high rate of success. I'm not saying all clean tech is bad, but again, it's that if we pick very specific sectors and don't think about the broader opportunities that are out there and where the high growth is, and don't support those entrepreneurs who are going after some of those sectors, I think we're going to miss out on some great opportunities and force them into other places. So I think there's certainly a need to build some sector expertise and to focus on what has made Michigan great, but not to be so focused on that we drive out entrepreneurs who are looking at bigger trends and send them elsewhere.
Well, I think it just depends on how much the state wants to actually actively invest in shaping the region. I think clean tech, you are fighting against sort of the macroeconomics, right, of that, right? The fact that China is producing solar and all this stuff, the economics that we'll never catch up with. But there's precedent. You look at like Korea and the success of like 5-year plans under military dictatorship, and how it turned around in 50 years to become sort of the world's leading producer of just about everything in our pockets. There's a lot to be said for actually making a choice and trying to leverage everything there. I do wish that the tier 2 and tier 3 auto suppliers would retool themselves and figure out how to do something different. But what kind of economic subsidy will we have to provide to allow that to happen? And how big are the bets that the state or anyone else is willing to make to support that is sort of the question.
So let me offer a little bit of strategy in terms of where the state is going, which I think will support some of what you've just said. We think that it's important for the state of Michigan to be a place where things are made. So if our underlying thinking and strategy is to be a location where things are made, that distinguishes us from the strategy that we see in, say, Silicon Valley and some of these other tech hotbeds. And so because we have made that a strategic direction, we will likely be a location that makes cars, that makes furniture, that processes food, that makes medical devices, and I can go on and on. But what you'll find embedded in all of those vertical industry sectors I just mentioned is you'll find incredible technology, whether it's in security or life sciences or IT and software. You'll find that a lot of the technologies that are being developed by some of the panelists as well as others have direct applications within the sectors that we think are important to our long-term future, which is making things. The other thing that we like about Silicon Valley and the model that they have out there, as a best practices model, it's not applicable to Michigan because we can't emulate Silicon Valley very easily. It's going to take us the next 40 or 50 years. And so from a best practices standpoint, we're actually not trying to chase that model. But if you think about it in terms of best principles, and to make a distinction between best practices and best principles, best practices, we're trying to emulate them. Best principles says, what do they do really well that's probably best in class across all industry sectors or all business types or strategies, and let's try and emulate those things. So they have an incredible ability to cultivate entrepreneurs. We want to develop an ability to cultivate entrepreneurs irrespective of what sector we're talking about. We want to develop an ability to have pools of capital that can support industries that have very high potential here in Michigan. So if you think about making things, venture capital almost steers clear of that, right? Try and find an advanced manufacturing company that can go and raise the kind of capital that an app development company can, right? It's almost impossible because we talk to advanced manufacturing companies all the time. So we know our challenge is different in terms of creating the capital pools, developing entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. But the principle of what happens in Silicon Valley has a lot of application here if we think about it in that context and not try and duplicate what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in if I can now. We've got a Twitter question. Sarah has asked, and I'll let whoever wants to tackle this one. Sarah asks us, it seems like all of us in Michigan know that the Mojo is here. How do we get people on a national level to engage? What does that outreach look like? Jeff.
Well, I would start out with,
I
have a story. I was giving a talk last week in New York to a group of technology developers. These are the top technology people in all the top companies, and the announcement came out about Michigan not allowing Tesla to be sold here. Now, there's a legitimate issue around that, there's a law on the books, etc. But the way it was handled in the PR aspect was very clumsy. And a guy, a very famous technologist, came up, put his arm around me and said, good luck trying to get a technologist now, that you can't have Tesla, which probably more than any company right now, including Apple, is a company really associated with innovation in this state. So the first thing is, let's unplug the political machinery for a minute. Let's look at what messages we're sending to other states when we do things like create situations which are very difficult for biotech to thrive in the state. When we make these kind of announcements, which within the state play well, but I'm somebody who spends millions of miles on airplanes over the years. Pay attention to what's happening in these other places, and I guess I'd also add, put listening posts in these other places. Stop listening to each other. Start listening to what the woman said on the video. Start listening to what they are saying in the Valley about what you're doing. Start listening to what they are saying in New York about what you're doing. Because that's what's really going to matter. That's where investability is going to come from. It's going to come from there. If you send them, if you believe that the whole message you have to send is internally, what you're going to do is you're going to have this self-reinforcing, self-fulfilling prophecy on it.
I have an audience question. And I'll ask you to start with this one, Patty. Someone has an idea for some type of a business that they want to grow, and the question is, where can entrepreneurs go to seek investment capital for their brainchild?
All right, so ideas are great. It's about execution that will get you dollars. So being able to, the state has a plethora of resources that help you take an idea, vet it, do discovery, make sure that you have something that is investable. All right, so there's really taking advantage of the regional programs, Spark boot camps, there's regional I-Corps programs that help you think through not just the technology and what you're trying to build, but is there anyone who's really going to buy this once you build it? And that is something that really is important, because failure is absolutely fine, but let's do it quickly and let's figure out what ideas the market's going to grab onto early. So, pots of funding, definitely, we have, there are lots of microloan programs, but we're going to be looking for people who have really gone through some sort of program that we at least know that they understand all of the road, the challenge of the road ahead. So it's getting a step beyond the idea and really starting to work on the idea is when pools of funding become much more readily available.
And again, we encourage you to send your questions along. We want to hear from you in the audience, and hashtag MishMojo. You can tweet us questions. I want to shift gears a little bit and get your thoughts on the fact that there's been such intense focus on the city of Detroit. When people think Michigan, they think of what's been going on in Detroit. Does the focus on Detroit help or hurt entrepreneurs throughout the rest of Michigan? And maybe I'll ask our entrepreneurs to kind of give us their views. Bob?
I think Ann Arbor has got, I'm biased, I grew up here. I think Ann Arbor's got a cachet that is transcending just the Michigan area. And when I look at the state, I wonder if we're spreading our chips, which aren't many, across way too many places that don't deserve them because of our political process. I think we should do like the VCs do and put our chips on the winners and put more chips on them and cut the losers. And I don't think we're doing that, quite honestly. I think Detroit is putting a lot of chips on it through Dan Gilbert and other things because we want it to be the economic center of the state. And it's only 40 miles away, so there's some synergies that can happen. But when I see things outstate that make me wonder why we're allocating there, I have questions. So I'd say, let's figure out where we can produce the best talent and accelerate it, not try and make everything that's not ready, doesn't have the tinder yet, getting the same sort of allocation portions.
So I'll differ a little bit on that. What I'm seeing in Detroit and what I think was really exciting is our ability to attract young people from outside the state to come to Detroit. Ann Arbor's nice and it's a great cultural place, and I'm a grad, I love it here, but my team, and my team's not alone, has been able to attract amazing talent from DC, New York, you know, the East Coast, to be able, who said, hey, I'm young, I'm graduating, I want to come to Detroit. This is a city where I can make a difference. I can have an impact here. And that ability to draw young talent, the downtown, midtown area, you can't find a place to rent right now. It's so incredible, that energy and that young spirit that's there. So I think from a draw perspective, I think young people really do feel that it's a place they want to be a part of change. And so I think investing in Detroit is investing in the region, because again, I already see that draw of young folks that want to be there. And I think it's an absolute critical place to establish these additional entrepreneurial hubs.
And actually, speaking of Detroit, we have a question from Randy via Twitter for Mike. How do we make Detroit as hospitable to families as it is now for businesses, and how to make real progress in the meantime?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Detroit is gaining momentum. I think that's probably a great way to put it. We spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time in Detroit working with companies, working with individuals. And you know, in order for cities to really be great and great for families, there are multiple components. The business component is coming along nicely. There's an element of young people that are finding great excitement in being in that urban setting, particularly in the midtown to downtown area that essentially has no vacancy. And as fast as new commercial structures are being built, they're being filled up. So that's all exciting. But then you get into the neighborhoods. And I think about the neighborhood I grew up in Flint, Michigan. There were homes, there were schools, there were a variety of different local stores that helped service the local economy, the drugstore, the corner grocery store, the pharmacy. There were the bars that my dad visited too frequently. There were a lot of things in the neighborhood that made the neighborhoods vibrant, and that's the element that I think requires the most work in Detroit right now. And when the neighborhoods start to come back, then you'll find these young people who are finding Detroit tremendously attractive right now, that typically are single or don't have children yet. At the point that they start having children and wanting to raise those children, they're going to need these other elements that I described. Neighborhoods that are vibrant and active, schools that can support them and their families, the neighborhood stores and so on. The lifestyle businesses that support neighborhoods need to be there. And that's a lot of the tough work that's still to be done by the city of Detroit. But the good thing is there is momentum. You know, I was talking with Professor DeGraff earlier, and he said, you know, when Detroit gets Whole Foods, we know it's starting to gain. And I said, well, Detroit has a Whole Foods. But it still doesn't have a Barney's yet, and it still doesn't have a few of these other really sense of place resources that start to signal that it's there, but the momentum is coming.
What about for the neighborhoods, for the longtime Detroiters who are living in neighborhoods and watching houses thin out and vacant lots and have a sense that they're not part of the party? They're not part of what the party's going on downtown and in midtown. What role do you think should entrepreneurs and startups have in including the rest of Detroit?
I mean, I'll jump in for a second, and I certainly want my other panelists to speak up. But we for the most part, concentrate these kind of conversations around high growth potential startups, tech-based startups. There's a lot of conversation around that. We tend to forget two other types of startups that are really important for cities like Detroit to be successful. There are social responsibility enterprises. In fact, you start to hear more and more about social responsibility these days, and the need to have startups that have the same kind of scalable potential that a cool tech-based startup would have, except it's not got the same motivation. It's about having impact in the community. We've got a couple of really interesting programs at the state that we've launched that are social impact programs. One is called Community Ventures, and basically it's about helping people who have some of the least opportunities to find jobs. And these are jobs that pay a living wage. It has potential to scale across the United States. So when we talk about does it scale, here's a program that's about helping people get jobs that have that potential to scale. That's just one example. The other thing that's needed in these communities are entrepreneurial startups that are lifestyle businesses. Again, we have resources like the Small Business Development Center and others that are concentrating time and effort on helping those lifestyle businesses. But ironically, they need the same help. They need good mentoring and coaching from entrepreneurs that have been successful. They need access to capital. They need facilities. They need access to customers, all these other things. And if you think we are struggling with the tech-based component of supporting startup businesses, we also struggle with the lifestyle business support for entrepreneurial startups. So we've got to have that as a part of our ecosystem. We're attempting to build it in partnership with organizations like the Small Business Development Center, the SBA, and other banks, but we still have a long way to go.
Keeping an eye on the clock, because we must do that, I want to go to another audience question, and that is engineering, entrepreneurship, management. We have those. Where do immigrants, diversity, and creativity fit into this mix? Who wants that?
Well, I had a class that worked on a project a couple of years ago for the Secretary of the Treasury here. And we looked at Flint. We looked at Mike's hometown, and we looked at the whole idea of creating a more favorable immigration environment in the city of Flint, which of course they've been championing in this administration. What's been very interesting to me is, of course, the history of innovation in America is the history of immigration. If you start looking at whether it's Tesla, go down the list. So that's been one of our great sources of innovation, because innovation is created through diversity. It's created through deviance, if you will, variety of ideas. So what's been interesting is, as these kinds of ideas have been percolating around for the last, let's say the last 10 years in the state, it runs into a political agenda. And the political agenda is, this is our area, this is somebody's sort of foisting a foreign element on here, which incidentally, there's always been xenophobia in America also, between different groups of people, I'm sorry to report. I'm from an immigrant family, I'm married to an immigrant, right? So I think I have a pretty good perspective on this, but I think the issue is this is critical. I think if you can introduce talent in small geographic areas with very specific types of reasons for admitting people, I think all of a sudden what happens is jobs cascade out. And I want to pick up on something that Michael had said earlier. In order to get rid of blight, one of the things you need are jobs. You need good jobs. What if the good jobs, though, don't happen in the neighborhood? What if they happen in some pockets, which I think is what Bob was getting at, where jobs are already being created? And what cascades out are jobs for people in those neighborhoods. I want to give you a great example. When I first came to Ann Arbor 25 years ago, I've been a professor for 25 years, it used to be in the morning, all the cars were going towards Detroit. Now, when you leave in the morning, all the cars are coming into Ann Arbor, right? So the notion is, it's clear the rivers have shifted. It doesn't mean that there won't be jobs in Detroit. Is everybody following this? It means that whatever you're building here, just like the automobile industry created jobs in Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids and everywhere else, it can cascade out. And I think this is one of the key things we can do with some of these cities, is interject some immigration into those cities, some people who have high skills, want to be part of the American dream, bring that culture with them, support them. I know Mike has been a big supporter of this kind of thing, and start those waves cascading out.
We have an audience question for our entrepreneurs, for Bob and Doug. Clearly workforce talent is important, but I'm wondering what the panelists think about the importance of infrastructure in attracting or retaining business.
Well, again, part of the things that we've started to see are focused efforts to try and apply state initiatives and capital, organizations, talent, retraining. There's a lot of things that are happening to try and facilitate attraction of these companies. If you get them going, some are just going to take off, and that's going to just create a vacuum where it will happen. People will want to join these companies, and there will be the things that allow in the talent side, the attraction of the talent to happen. I've seen it at MyBuys. We didn't have anybody who knew software that we could find, so we just hired people from the University of Michigan and said, we'll teach you. We have training programs to teach people what they need to know. And as I think through about how we go, I'd say we've made a baby step. And one thing we could do is to say, guess what? Baby step worked. Now, we've got a lot of wealth in Michigan, a lot of capital, and we're not applying as a percentage of that capital. If we want to make a strategic bet, from the state to the funds to the endowments to the wealthy people, quit maximizing your wealth, for 0% returns in the market today and try and figure out how to invest big money for a strategic bet. And that's not what we've done yet. We're baby stepping this. And I think we should take a much bigger step. And that takes some people with some money to say, yeah, I'm not going to lose all my wealth, and I'm going to create a lot of interesting change for the state.
Patty, do you have any thoughts on, anything to add on that, or any thoughts on what Bob said?
So Michigan is, I think from the video is talking about, recognizing Michigan's, where we need to improve. And I think we're a conservative state with conservative people. We're used to, supporting each other and taking the Midwest, we're hardworking and we'll get through this. And, it's about building things, the right way. And I think there's a lot of cultural changes that need to happen on the entrepreneurial side, but I think they're happening. But you look at so what Dan Gilbert did downtown Detroit with DVP, it's a young team and they're still trying to figure it out, but it made a big splash nationally. And so when people think of Detroit now, they're thinking about the Madison building and they're thinking about that entrepreneurial climate, but that made a huge difference. And whether that fund is hugely successful or not, who knows? But the power that went behind that big bet Dan has made, if you multiply that out and you really, you get 5 kind of Big Dan type initiatives out there, that will make a huge impact over time and quickly. And again, there'll be lots of failure along the way, but it'll be quick and explosive versus sort of the trickling. But I don't know, I don't think we have the corporate support. I don't think we have yet that will or energy in the state yet to support that high big bet.
I told you this is going to fly by. We're down to our last few minutes here, and I'm going to just throw a question out, and I'd like you to each take turns with whatever you want to answer to it. And the question is, what next? What needs to happen next?
So I'll leave the audience with an actionable thing. You should visit michiganbusiness.org. michiganbusiness.org. That is our website that will allow you to access most of the tools that we have that are available. Some have been described here today, but not in enough detail that I think you can figure it out. But if you go to michiganbusiness.org, you'll be able to navigate through our website and find all the resources you're looking for. And if you have any problem with that, just find me via our website and send me a message, and I'll get you connected to the right people in our organization or a lot of the partners that we have throughout the state who actually help us in executing our strategies around this whole space of entrepreneurship and how do we get our Michigan mojo going.
I think one of the things that we probably should be focused on next is how we build more of the connectivity between the grassroots organizations that actually are operating in the various cities in Michigan to actually connect a lot of the second stage entrepreneurs. There's a lot that's happening at a very, very early stage where you basically have 2 people and an idea and they're getting off the ground and they're finding seed funding, and a bunch of these programs target that earliest sort of period of creation. But as soon as you have a working company, you need to scale it for us to get to the kind of results that Jeff's talking about. To have companies that are do have a shot at becoming the next billion-dollar exits, there needs to be a little bit more of an infrastructure, some connectivity for that. So I do think a little bit more effort on again how we focus on connecting those resources and building more of the grassroots community would be very important.
I think this panel is a great sort of jumping off point. I think it'd be terrific if the state picked 12 entrepreneurs who've created a lot of jobs and a lot of wealth, created an advisory committee to our legislative branch, and when they start passing laws, sort of get their thumbs up or thumbs down, sort of consumer reports, is a red dot or black dot kind of a thing we're doing here. Because I think we're terribly confusing politics with economics here. And then the second thing, I think, building on what has already been said here, the second thing is Everything isn't equal when it comes to innovation and creating jobs. I think it'd be wonderful to identify 100 to 250 people in the state who are students here, who are high potential, create some special track for those people so that investability was possible, so that we could keep our best and brightest. I know one of my big challenges is because I am one of the innovation professors at one of the top innovation schools, is all the best kids go. It would be very nice to see some things put in place to keep them here in our beautiful state.
Or bring them back. But I would say, you know, find your mojo. Be a part of this change. There's a lot of momentum, and you can be a part. You don't have to start your own company. Join a startup, or take entrepreneurial classes, or be a part of the pitch sessions that go on. Be supportive and use your talent to help entrepreneurs and grow their businesses. So there's so much knowledge that sits within our community in so many different ways. And one of our great strengths here in Michigan is that we do work together and we are very collaborative. So be a part of it. Join all the, you know, you're here for a reason, right? You're here in this room listening, but be a part of it. And I think there's so much energy and interest in the state that it's just taking a small step, each of us being a part of it, that makes the difference in the long run.
What's next? I think we're seeing a lot of great things. I think we've got steps. I think the state should invest more. You know, co-matching funds, incentives for people to stay. I think those are things we could do to get people to stay. And you know, right now we've got a co-matching fund that might put, you know, $100K in next to a deal, but that's not going to compete with a $5 million or $10 million term sheet from the West Coast. So we've got to get more money in. We've got to create incentives for venture capital somehow. I love the idea of a committee to help the state think through and get out of the malaise of thinking in the past and looking forward. I also think there's a whole bunch of assets and businesses here that don't realize that the data they're sitting on, the power that is just latent in their companies. And so a quick little thing, Pete Carmanos, another one of the successful entrepreneurs, he started a company called Mad Dog Technologies. Those guys are up to something really interesting, which is instead of starting venture capitalists where we give guys like Doug and me money, we have nothing but an idea and a belief that we can get it done, and you know, 80-90% of those don't hit it. What about starting with a business who's got this latent energy and then create a new venture off of it that maximizes it with the support of a very successful company? And so Pete's got a really interesting twist on trying to start businesses from a foundation of solidity and assets. And so that might be something that becomes a twist for Michigan, which is how do we take our assets and better turn them as opposed to starting from the ground that might not be so ready for fire yet.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for now because our time is up, but we have lots of good questions that came through. So if you in the audience have a question that we weren't able to get to, please stick around for an informal Q&A with any of our panelists who are also able to stick around after we wrap up. We also want to invite all of you to join us next Tuesday. Michigan Radio is going to have a special Issues and Ale election night party. I'll be hosting. We'll watch the returns, talk about that. We'll have political experts who will give us their predictions and analysis. So it's Tuesday, election night, November 4th, 7:30 p.m. at the Circus Bar in downtown Ann Arbor. Meantime, a pleasure to have you with us, Mike Finney, Doug Song, Jeff DeGraff, Patty Glazer, and Bob Sell. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. It was a terrific event. Thank you.
Because some of the things we'll talk about here today, I think are the things people can dream about, but even more importantly, I think these are the things that we can actually do.